The dust storm rolled through Redemption Creek like God's own judgment, coating everything in a fine layer of grit that turned the world sepia. It was the kind of town where hope went to die, where the sun baked the earth so hard that even the cacti seemed to wilt in defeat. Main Street consisted of a dozen weathered buildings leaning against each other for support, their paint long since surrendered to the relentless desert wind. Mercy Whitlow knelt in the front pew of her father's church, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. The late afternoon light filtered through the single stained glass window, casting fractured rainbows across her modest gray dress. At 23, she was considered past her prime by the town's standards. Yet her beauty remained untouched by the harshness that aged most women prematurely in these parts. Her auburn hair, pulled back in a severe bun, caught the dying light like copper pennies. "Lord," she whispered, her voice barely disturbing the dust motes dancing in the air. "If there's any mercy left in your grand design, show me a sign. Show me there's something more than this." The weight of her impending marriage to Deputy Sheriff Horace Bellamy pressed down on her shoulders like a millstone. In 3 days' time, she would stand at this very altar and pledge herself to a man whose hands were as cruel as they were possessive. But what choice did she have? Her father's gambling debts had backed them into a corner, and Horace had been all too eager to play savior for a price. The church door creaked open, interrupting her desperate prayer. Mercy didn't turn, assuming it was Mrs. Henderson come to discuss Sunday's potluck dinner. But the footsteps that echoed across the worn wooden floor were heavier, accompanied by the distinct jingle of spurs. Clay Travers stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the dying light. Road dust clung to his weathered duster, and his hat shadowed features that hadn't seen a razor in days. He'd ridden hard from nowhere to nowhere, just another drifter seeking shelter from the coming storm. The church had seemed as good a place as any to wait out the night. He hadn't expected to find an angel kneeling in the twilight. Mercy turned at last, and their eyes met across the empty pews. Something passed between them in that moment. Recognition. Though they'd never met, perhaps it was the loneliness that recognized its twin, or maybe it was simply two souls touching across the void that separated all human hearts. "I'm sorry," Clay said, his voice rough from the trail. "Didn't mean to intrude. I was just looking for—" "Sanctuary," Mercy supplied, rising gracefully to her feet. "You'll find precious little of that in Redemption Creek, I'm afraid." A ghost of a smile touched Clay's lips. "Been my experience that sanctuary's more about the company than the location, ma'am." She should have been scandalized. Alone in the church with a strange man. Should have called for her father or fled to the parsonage next door. Instead, she found herself moving down the aisle toward him, drawn by something she couldn't name. "You're running from something," she said. It wasn't a question. "We're all running from something." Clay removed his hat, revealing dark hair shot through with premature silver and eyes the color of storm clouds. "Question is whether we're running towards something better or just running. And which are you doing, Mr. Travers, Clay Travers? And I suppose I won't know until I stop running long enough to look around." They stood facing each other in the aisle, two strangers caught in an eddy of fate. Mercy had never felt so seen, so exposed. This man looked at her not as the preacher's daughter or Horace Bellamy's intended, but as simply Mercy, whoever that was beneath all the layers of duty and expectation. "You should go," she said, though the words felt like swallowing glass. It isn't proper. Very little in life is proper. Miss Whitlow, Mercy Whitlow, Mercy." He said her name like a prayer, like a promise. "That's something I haven't encountered in a long while." The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows and sending sheets of dust against the walls. The storm would be on them soon, turning the world into a howling chaos of sand and wind. Clay glanced toward the door, then back at Mercy. "I'll move on if you want. Find somewhere else to weather this." "No." The word escaped before she could stop it. "That is, the church is open to all who seek shelter. My father taught me that much, at least." Clay moved to a back pew, settling his long frame onto the hard wood with a quiet groan. He'd been in the saddle for 3 days straight, running from a past that had too many teeth and not enough forgiveness. Mercy returned to her place at the front, but her prayers had fled. All she could think about was the stranger sitting 20 feet away, his presence filling the small church like smoke. "What are you praying for so hard?" Clay asked after a long silence. "If you don't mind my asking." Mercy's laugh was bitter as desert water. "Deliverance, a miracle, a sign that God hasn't forgotten this place entirely. Maybe he sent me." She turned to look at him, finding him watching her with those storm-colored eyes. A drifter with blood on his hands? That's God's idea of a miracle? Clay didn't deny the blood. How could he? It was written in every line of his body, in the way his hand never strayed far from the colt at his hip. Maybe God's got a sense of humor. Or maybe he knows that sometimes it takes someone already damned to recognize salvation when he sees it. "I'm getting married in 3 days, Mercy said suddenly, needing him to know, needing to put that barrier between them. "Congratulations. It's not, I don't love him, I don't even like him, but he owns my father's debts, and this is the only way to keep us from losing everything." Clay was on his feet before he realized he'd moved, crossing the distance between them in long strides. That's no reason to chain yourself to a man. It's the only reason that matters in a place like this. Tears she'd held back for weeks finally spilled over. "You don't understand. Women don't get to choose their own paths here. We go from our father's house to our husband's house, and we're grateful for the protection." What if you could choose? What if you could just leave? With a stranger? A man who admits he has blood on his hands. But even as she said it, some wild part of her, the part she'd buried beneath layers of propriety and prayer, screamed, yes. Clay reached out, slowly, giving her time to pull away. His thumb brushed away a tear from her cheek, the touch so gentle it broke her heart. "I'm not offering to take you anywhere, Mercy. I've got no right to offer anyone anything. I think you deserve to know that there are other choices, even if they're hard ones." The wind howled louder, and somewhere in town, a shutter banged loose. The storm was almost upon them. Mercy knew she should step back, should put proper distance between them. Instead, she found herself leaning into his touch. "I should go," she whispered. "You should." Neither of them moved. And then, with the inevitability of the storm bearing down on them, Clay leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. It was barely a kiss, just the lightest touch, soft as a butterfly's wing, gentle as a prayer. But it shattered something inside Mercy, broke open a dam she'd built around her heart. When he pulled back, they were both breathing hard, staring at each other like they'd just discovered fire. "I'm sorry," Clay said. "I had no right." "Don't!" Mercy pressed her fingers to his lips. "Don't apologize. Not for the only real thing that's happened to me in years." The church door burst open, wind and sand swirling in like dervishes. Mercy's father stood in the doorway, his black coat whipping around him. "Mercy, what in God's name?" She stepped away from Clay, but not quickly enough. Her father's eyes narrowed, taking in the stranger, his daughter's tear-stained face, the charged air between them. "Get to the house," Reverend Whitlow commanded. "Now." Mercy hesitated, glancing back at Clay. He gave her the slightest nod, and she fled into the storm, her father's glare following her like hellfire. "And you," the Reverend said, turning his righteous fury on Clay. "You'll be gone by morning, or I'll have the sheriff run you out." Clay settled his hat back on his head, touching the brim in a mockery of respect. "I'll be gone when the storm passes. Reverend, not before." He returned to his pew as the Reverend stormed out, leaving Clay alone with the howling wind and the lingering scent of lavender water. He touched his lips, still feeling the ghost of that kiss, still seeing the desperation in Mercy's eyes. He'd come to Redemption Creek looking for nothing more than shelter from a storm. But sometimes, Clay reflected as the wind threatened to tear the roof from the rafters, a man found things he didn't even know he was searching for. Mercy lay awake in her narrow bed, listening to the storm rage outside. Her lips still tingled from Clay's kiss, and shame warred with a fierce, unexpected joy in her chest. She pressed her fingers to her mouth, trying to hold on to the sensation, even as her father's words echoed from the next room. "That drifter will bring nothing but trouble," Reverend Whitlow muttered to himself, "as if we don't have enough to worry about with Horace breathing down our necks." She rose before dawn, unable to bear the restlessness any longer. The storm had passed, leaving the world scoured clean and sparkling under the first rays of sunlight. Mercy dressed quietly and slipped out the back door, drawn to the church by a force she couldn't name. The sanctuary was empty. Her heart sank as she walked between the pews, finding no trace of Clay except for a few grains of trail dust on the floor where he'd stood. Of course he'd gone. What had she expected? That a single kiss could change the trajectory of 2 lives? A soft groan from beneath the floorboards made her freeze. She knew that sound. Someone in pain, trying to muffle it. Following the noise, she discovered the trap door to the church's root cellar, used for storing preserves and emergency supplies. It was slightly ajar. Clay lay on a pile of old flour sacks, his shirt soaked with blood from a wound in his shoulder. His face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cellar's coolness. He'd managed to drag himself down here after being shot, probably during the night. "Clay," she breathed, dropping to her knees beside him. His eyes fluttered open, focusing on her with difficulty. "Mercy, you shouldn't be here." "Hush." She examined the wound with practiced efficiency. Living on the frontier meant every woman learned basic doctoring. "Who did this?" "Doesn't matter. I need to go. Can't bring my troubles to your door." "You're not going anywhere with a bullet in your shoulder." She tore strips from her petticoat, pressing them against the wound. "I'll be back with supplies. Don't you dare move." Mercy became a ghost in her own life over the following days, maintaining the facade of the dutiful daughter while secretly nursing Clay back to health. She smuggled food, water, and medical supplies to the cellar, spending stolen hours by his side as his fever broke and the wound began to heal. "Why are you doing this?" Clay asked one evening as she changed his bandages. "You're risking everything." "Maybe I'm tired of being careful," she replied, her hands gentle but sure. "Maybe I want to do one thing in my life that's mine to choose." As Clay recovered, they talked. He told her about his mother, Sarah Travers, a woman who'd tried to scratch out a living in a mining camp after his father died, about the night Sheriff Tom Garrett had come to their shack, drunk and violent, demanding payment of a different kind for their debts. "I was 17, Clay said, staring at the cellar's rough ceiling. "Old enough to work the mines, old enough to protect her, when I walked in and saw him forcing himself on her, his hands clenched into fists. I didn't think, just grabbed his gun and fired. He died instantly." Mercy's hand found his, squeezing gently. "You were protecting your mother. Any court would understand. No court in that town would take the word of a nobody like me over a dead sheriff. Been running for 6 years now." She brought him books from her father's library, and they read together by candlelight. Poetry, philosophy, even the occasional dime novel that made them both laugh. Clay was educated, she discovered, self-taught from whatever books he could trade for on the trail. "My mother insisted I learn to read," he explained. "Said it was the only way to be truly free." She was right about a lot of things. One afternoon, as Mercy spread salve on his healing wound, Clay caught her hand. "Tell me about Horace Bellamy." Her face darkened. "He owns the largest ranch in the valley, controls the water rights, which means he controls everything. When Papa lost our savings in a bad investment, Horace was there with an offer. Clear the debt in exchange for my hand. And if you refuse, then we lose everything. The church, the parsonage, Papa's position. In a town like this, that's a death sentence." She tried to smile. "Besides, where would I go? What would I do? I can't teach. Horace made sure the school board wouldn't hire me. Can't work in the shops. He owns those too." Clay's jaw tightened. "Men like that, they don't want wives. They want property." "I know. Her voice was barely a whisper. But what choice do I have? There's always a choice. Mercy. It might not be a good one, but it's there. Days turned into a week, then 2. Clay grew stronger, and with his strength came a different kind of tension between them. Every accidental touch sparked like lightning. Every shared glance held promises neither dared speak aloud. One night, Mercy arrived to find Clay standing, testing his strength. "I should go," he said without preamble. "I'm healed enough to ride. Every day I stay puts you in more danger." "I don't care about the danger. You should." He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs tracing her cheekbones. "Mercy, you're the finest thing I've ever known. I won't be the reason your life gets destroyed." "My life is already destroyed," she said fiercely. "In 2 days, I marry Horace. I become his property, his thing to use as he sees fit. That's destruction. Clay, this," she gestured between them, "this is the only thing that feels like living." He kissed her then, not gentle like the first time, but with all the desperation of a drowning man. She responded with equal fervor, pouring all her fear and longing and rebellion into the kiss. When they broke apart, both were shaking. "Teach me," she said suddenly. "What?" "To shoot, to ride, to survive out there." She gripped his shirt. "If I'm going to be trapped, at least teach me how to fight back." Something shifted in Clay's expression. "You're serious." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." He found an old derringer in the church's donation box, probably left by some repentant gambler. In the dark hours before dawn, he taught her to load, aim, and fire. Her hands were steady, her eye true. "You're a natural," he said with admiration. "Most people flinch from the recoil. You lean into it." "I'm tired of flinching." One night, as rain drummed on the church roof, Mercy made a decision that would have horrified her just weeks ago. She descended to the cellar with determination in her step and fire in her eyes. "Mercy?" Clay sat up from his makeshift bed. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," she said, shedding her shawl. "For the first time in my life, something's right. Mercy, we can't. Don't tell me what we can't do." She moved toward him with purpose. "In 36 hours, I'll belong to another man, but tonight, right now, I belong to myself, and I choose you." What followed was a communion of souls as much as bodies, a claiming and a surrender all at once. In the darkness of that cellar, surrounded by preserves and old hymn books, they created their own sacred space. Every touch was a promise, every whispered word a prayer more honest than any Mercy had ever uttered in the church above. Afterwards, they lay entwined on the narrow pile of flour sacks. Listening to the rain, Clay traced lazy patterns on Mercy's bare shoulder, marveling at the courage of this woman who'd been raised to be meek and had chosen to be mighty. Instead, "I love you," Mercy said simply. "I know it's too soon, too impossible, too everything, but I do." Clay pulled her closer, pressing his lips to her hair. "I loved you the moment you found me bleeding in this cellar and decided to save me instead of turn me in. Hell, maybe I loved you from that first kiss. What are we going to do?" "I don't know, but we'll figure it out. Together." But even as they made plans and promises in the darkness, morning crept closer, bringing with it the weight of reality. Mercy's wedding dress hung in her room like a shroud. Horace's men patrolled the town more frequently, sensing something amiss, and Reverend Whitlow watched his daughter with increasingly suspicious eyes. "He knows something's changed," Mercy confided the next night. "Papa keeps asking questions, watching me." Clay gripped her hands. "Then we leave. Tonight. I've got a horse hidden outside town, and I know places we can go where—" The cellar door burst open, lantern light flooding the space. Reverend Whitlow stood at the top of the stairs, his face a mask of righteous fury. Behind him, Horace Bellamy's cruel smile gleamed in the darkness. "Well, well," Horace drawled. "Looks like my bride-to-be has been keeping secrets." Mercy moved instinctively in front of Clay, but Horace's men were already descending the stairs, Guns drawn. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The sanctuary had become a trap, and dawn was still hours away. "Step away from him. Mercy!" Horace's voice was dangerously soft, like a snake before it strikes. His men flanked him, rifles trained on Clay. "No!" Mercy stood her ground, chin raised in defiance. "I won't let you hurt him." Horace's laugh was ugly. "Hurt him, my dear. I'm going to hang him. But first, he's going to watch what happens to women who play the harlot." "That's enough." Reverend Whitlow's voice shook, whether from anger or fear. Mercy couldn't tell. "She's still my daughter, Horace. We had an agreement. The agreement was for a virtuous bride." Horace snarled. "Not damaged goods." Clay tensed behind Mercy, and she could feel him calculating odds, distances, chances. "Let her go," he said quietly. "This is between you and me." "Oh, I don't think so." Horace descended the stairs, his spurs ringing with each step. "You see, Mr. Travers, yes, I know who you are. Worth quite a bounty, dead or alive. You've touched what's mine. That's a debt that requires special payment." He nodded to his men. They moved forward, and Clay pushed Mercy aside, meeting them head on. The cellar erupted in violence. Clay fought like a man with nothing to lose, but he was outnumbered and still weak from his wound. Within moments, they had him on the ground, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. "Stop!" Mercy threw herself at Horace, beating at his chest. "I'll do anything. Just don't hurt him." Horace caught her wrists, squeezing until she cried out, "Anything? Yes." "Then you'll watch." He dragged her up the stairs, his men following with Clay between them. "You'll watch what happens to men who dare touch Horace Bellamy's property." They hauled Clay to the town square, where a crowd was already gathering. Word traveled fast in Redemption Creek, and the prospect of violence drew people like flies to carrion. Someone had lit torches, turning the night into a hellish orange glow. "String him up," Horace commanded, pointing to the old cottonwood that served as the town's gallows tree. "No trial." Clay spat blood onto the dusty ground. "Even in this hellhole, a man's entitled to—" Horace's fist connected with Clay's jaw. "You're entitled to nothing. Murderer, boys! Get the rope." Mercy struggled against the men holding her, tears streaming down her face. "Papa, please, say something!" Reverend Whitlow stood at the edge of the crowd, his face a battlefield of emotions. For a moment, she thought she saw her father, the man who'd taught her about mercy and compassion. Then his expression hardened. "He brought this on himself," the Reverend said coldly. "As did you, daughter." The words cut deeper than any physical blow. Mercy sagged in her captor's grip, watching in horror as they positioned Clay beneath the tree. His eyes found hers across the crowd, and in them she saw not fear but sorrow, not for himself, but for her. "Any last words?" Horace mocked, personally checking the noose. Clay never looked away from Mercy. "Yeah, tell her she was worth it, every second." "How touching." Horace raised his hand to signal the execution. "Wait!" A new voice cut through the night. An elderly black man pushed through the crowd, leaning heavily on a walking stick. Mercy recognized him. Moses Freeman, who ran the livery stable. "What is it, old man?" Horace's impatience was evident. Moses hobbled forward, reaching into his coat. "Got something here might interest you. Deputy, letter from the territorial governor." He produced a folded paper. "Came in on yesterday's stage." Horace snatched the letter, reading quickly. His face darkened with each line. "This is impossible." "What is it?" someone called from the crowd. Moses smiled, a gleam of satisfaction in his rheumy eyes. "Full pardon for Clay Travers. Seems the governor reviewed his case. Killing a lawman who's committing a crime ain't murder. It's justice." The crowd murmured, "Uncertain." Horace crumpled the letter. "This changes nothing. He's still a drifter who violated—" "The law?" Moses interrupted. "Funny thing about the law. Deputy, it applies to everyone, even you." He raised his voice. "How many here remember Tom Garrett? Remember what kind of lawman he was?" Voices rose from the crowd. Old grievances, long-buried memories. Tom Garrett had been no saint, and everyone knew it. The tide was turning. Horace's hand went to his gun. "Enough! I'm the law in this town." "No." Mercy found her voice, and with it, her strength. She wrenched free from her captors, standing tall in the flickering torchlight. "You're not the law. You're just another bully with a gun and too much money." She walked to Clay, reached up, and removed the noose from his neck. For a moment, the entire town held its breath. "Anyone who wants to stop me will have to go through me first," she declared. "And ask yourself, is Horace Bellamy really worth dying for?" The crowd shifted uneasily. These were townspeople, not gunmen. They'd come for a spectacle, not a battle. Horace's face contorted with rage. "You little—" He raised his hand to strike her. Clay moved like lightning, despite his bonds. His boot connected with Horace's knee, sending the man sprawling. In the confusion, Moses produced a knife, cutting Clay's ropes. "Run!" the old man hissed. "Both of you!" Clay grabbed Mercy's hand, and they fled into the darkness beyond the torches. Behind them, Horace's screams of rage echoed through the night. But his men were slow to pursue. Without the mob's bloodlust to drive them, they seemed uncertain. Clay led her through back alleys and shadowed paths he'd scouted during his recovery. They reached the hidden grove where he'd left his horse, a sturdy bay mare who nickered softly at their approach. "We can't stop," Clay said, swinging into the saddle and pulling Mercy up behind him. "He'll come after us. I know." She wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face against his back. "I don't care." They rode hard through the night, following game trails and creek beds to mask their passage. As dawn broke over the desert, they finally stopped to rest the horse at a small spring surrounded by mesquite trees. Mercy slid down, legs shaking from the ride. She looked back the way they'd come, seeing nothing but empty landscape. "We did it. We actually did it." Clay dismounted, pulling her into his arms. "You saved my life back there. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen." "I was terrified," she admitted against his chest. "But I was more terrified of losing you." He tilted her chin up, kissing her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "What now? You've given up everything." "No." She smiled through her tears. "I've gained everything. Freedom, choice, you. It won't be easy. We'll be hunted. We'll have to keep moving, at least for a while. Then we move." She squared her shoulders. "Teach me to be like you, to survive out here." Over the following days, Clay did exactly that. He taught her to read the land, to find water where none seemed to exist, how to build a fire that wouldn't smoke, how to navigate by the stars. Mercy proved an apt pupil, adapting to hardship with a resilience that surprised them both. They made camp in a box canyon with high walls and only one entrance. "Defensible," Clay said. As night fell, they sat by their small fire, planning their next move. "There's a town about a week's ride north," Clay said, sketching in the dirt with a stick. "Silver City, mining town, lots of strangers coming and going. We could disappear there for a while, maybe find work." "As what?" Mercy asked. "I can't exactly give references from my position as a preacher's daughter. You'd be surprised what people need in a mining town. Someone who can read and write, do figures, and I can work mines, ranches, whatever pays." She studied him in the firelight. "Is this the life you want? Always running, always looking over your shoulder? With you?" He took her hand. "I'd live in hell itself." "Don't say that." She squeezed his fingers. "We'll make our own paradise. Somehow." That night, under a blanket of stars, they made love with a desperate passion born of freedom and fear. Every touch was precious, stolen from a world that wanted to tear them apart. Mercy had never felt so alive, so completely herself. But as Clay held her afterwards, both of them knew the truth they didn't speak. Horace Bellamy was not a man who forgot slights. He would come for them. The only question was when. A coyote howled in the distance, and Mercy shivered despite the warmth of Clay's arms. She'd chosen love over safety, freedom over certainty. Now she had to learn to live with that choice. "No regrets?" Clay whispered in the darkness. "None," she said firmly. "Whatever comes, we face it together." "Together," he agreed, and held her tighter as the desert night wrapped around them like a shroud. The posse found them at dawn on the 5th day. Clay had known they were coming, the dust cloud on the horizon, the circling buzzards disturbed from their roosts. He'd pushed hard through the night, but the mare was exhausted, and Mercy could barely stay in the saddle. "There!" Mercy pointed to a cluster of rocks ahead. "We can make a stand." Clay smiled grimly at how quickly she'd learned to think tactically, but he shook his head. "No cover for the horse. Without her, we're dead anyway." The riders were closing fast. 8 men, maybe 10. Clay recognized Horace's distinctive black stallion in the lead. He made a decision that tore at his heart. "Listen to me," he said urgently, reining in the mare. "I'm going to buy you time. Take the horse and—" "No," Mercy's voice was steel. "We stay together or not at all." "Damn it, Mercy, this isn't a time for heroics." "Then stop trying to be a hero." She slid down from the horse, pulling the derringer he'd taught her to use. "Besides, you taught me to shoot, remember?" The posse thundered to a halt 50 yards away, kicking up a cloud of alkali dust. Horace dismounted slowly, savoring the moment. His face bore the bruises from their last encounter, but his smile was triumphant. Well, the lovebirds have stopped flying." He gestured to his men. "Take them." "That's close enough." Clay drew his Colt, the click of the hammer loud in the morning silence. "Unless you boys are eager to meet your maker." The posse hesitated. They were hired guns. "Not martyrs?" Horace's face darkened. "I'm paying you men good money. Not enough to be first to die." One of them muttered. "Then I'll do it myself." Horace stepped forward, hand on his gun. "You humiliated me, Travers, made me look weak in front of the whole town. That's a debt that requires blood payment." "The only debt here is yours," a familiar voice called out. Moses Freeman rode out from behind a stand of yucca, but he wasn't alone. A dozen riders flanked him, townspeople from Redemption Creek, Mrs. Henderson, the baker, Jim Torres, the blacksmith, even young Timothy Walsh from the general store. "What is this?" Horace sputtered. "This is what happens when you push folks too far," Moses said calmly. "You've bled this town dry for years. Bellamy, taking our water, our money, our dignity. Well, we've had enough. You dare, we dare plenty." "Mrs." Henderson urged her horse forward. She was 60 if she was a day, but she held a shotgun with steady hands. That pardon Moses showed, it was real, which makes what you're doing murder, and we won't stand for it. The standoff stretched taut as a fiddle string. Clay kept his gun trained on Horace, but his mind raced. Even with help, blood would spill here, good people would die. "There's another way," Clay said suddenly. "You and me, Horace, right here, right now. Winner walks away, loser doesn't." Mercy grabbed his arm. "Clay, no, it's the only way, no one else dies." He looked down at her, memorizing her face. "Trust me." Horace's eyes glittered with malice. "You're on Drifter. Someone count it down." The 2 men faced each other in the growing light, hands hovering over their guns. The desert held its breath. Moses raised his hand. "On 3, 1. Clay thought of his father, lynched for a crime he didn't commit. 2. He thought of his mother, dying of shame and sorrow. 3. The guns roared as one. Clay felt the wind of Horace's bullet pass his ear. His own shot was true, catching Horace center mass. The deputy staggered, looking down at the spreading red stain with amazement. You actually—" Horace fell to his knees, then pitched forward into the dust. His hired guns looked at each other, then at the armed townspeople. Without a word, they wheeled their horses and rode away. Bullies without their leader were just scared men far from home. Clay holstered his gun, suddenly exhausted. Mercy was there, holding him up, tears streaming down her face. "It's over," she whispered. "It's finally over." "Not quite," Moses said, riding closer. "There's still the matter of that murder charge." Clay straightened, ready to run again if needed. But Moses smiled. "Which is why we're all going to testify that Horace Bellamy drew first on an unarmed man. Self-defense, pure and simple. Anyone disagree?" The townspeople shook their heads. "Misses." Henderson spat in the general direction of Horace's body. "That varmint got what was coming to him. About time, too." "What about the sheriff?" Mercy asked. "The real law?" "Sheriff's been looking for an excuse to be rid of Horace for years." Jim Torres said, "Man's been making his job harder, acting like he owns the badge. I reckon he'll be relieved." Moses produced a folded paper from his vest. "There's more. That pardon I showed. It came with a letter. Seems the territorial governor's been getting complaints about Redemption Creek for some time. He's sending a federal marshal to clean house, establish real law and order. Then we'd best disappear until things settle down." Clay said, "Or," Moses said carefully, "you could stay. Town needs good men, Travers, men who'll stand up to bullies. Might even be a deputy position open now." Clay looked at Mercy, saw his own amazement reflected in her eyes. "I'm wanted in 3 states. We're wanted. That pardon covers all related charges stemming from the original incident. You're a free man." Free. The word felt foreign on Clay's tongue. He'd been running so long. He'd forgotten what it meant to stop. "What about you?" he asked Mercy. "Could you go back, face your father, the town?" She lifted her chin. "I'm not the same girl who knelt in that church praying for deliverance. I found it, just not how I expected." She took his hand. "But if you need to keep moving, I'll follow you anywhere. Maybe we could try staying still for a while." He pulled her close. "See how it feels to have a home." The ride back to Redemption Creek was surreal. Where Clay expected judgment and condemnation, he found curiosity and even admiration. The story had already grown in the telling. How Mercy Whitlow had faced down a dozen armed men. How Clay Travers had outdrawn the fastest gun in the territory. Reverend Whitlow stood on the church steps as they arrived, his face unreadable. Mercy tensed in the saddle behind Clay. "Papa," she said simply. "Daughter." He looked between them, something warring in his expression. "I suppose you'll be wanting to marry this man properly now." Mercy's gasp was audible. "Papa." The Reverend's stern facade cracked slightly. "I've had 5 days to think, 5 days to realize I nearly lost my only child to pride and greed. When Moses and the others rode out, I prayed as I haven't prayed in years." He descended the steps slowly. "I was wrong. About many things. Can you forgive a foolish old man?" Mercy slid from the horse and ran to her father, embracing him as both wept. Clay dismounted more slowly, watching the reunion with a lump in his throat. "Mr. Travers," the Reverend said, extending his hand. "I believe I owe you an apology as well. And perhaps a wedding?" Clay shook the offered hand, hardly believing this reversal of fortune. "Sir, I have nothing to offer your daughter. No home, no prospects. You have courage." Reverend Whitlow interrupted. "You have honor. You protected her when I failed to. That's worth more than money." "Besides," Mercy said, returning to Clay's side, "we'll build our life together. From nothing if we have to." As it turned out, they didn't start from nothing. The grateful townspeople, freed from Horace's stranglehold, were eager to help. Jim Torres offered Clay work at the smithy, Mrs. Henderson needed someone who could read and write to help with her accounts. A perfect job for Mercy. They were married a week later in a simple ceremony. Mercy wore her mother's wedding dress, aired out and altered to fit. Clay stood at the altar in a borrowed suit, looking uncomfortable but radiantly happy. "Do you, Clayton James Travers, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Reverend Whitlow asked, his voice thick with emotion. "I do," Clay said, his eyes never leaving Mercy's face. "Do you, Mercy Grace Whitlow, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," she breathed, feeling as if her heart might burst from joy. "Then, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife." The Reverend smiled. "You may kiss your bride, son." This kiss was different from their first, no longer forbidden, no longer desperate. It was a promise sealed before God and man, a beginning instead of a potential ending. The small congregation erupted in cheers. Moses Freeman wiped tears from his eyes. Even Mrs. Henderson sniffled into her handkerchief. As they walked down the aisle as husband and wife, Mercy whispered, "No regrets?" "None," Clay replied, squeezing her hand. "You? Only one," she said with a mischievous smile. "I wish that first kiss had lasted longer." "Well, Mrs. Travers," he said, the name sending a thrill through both of them. "We've got the rest of our lives to make up for it." They emerged from the church into blazing sunlight. The town that had once seemed a prison now felt like possibility. They'd fought for their love, bled for it, nearly died for it. Now they had the chance to live for it. The dream of peace lasted exactly 3 weeks. Clay woke to the sound of horses approaching fast. Too many horses for honest folk at this hour. He reached for his gun, then heard Mercy gasp beside him. Through their small window, torchlight danced like hellfire. "Get dressed," he said quietly, already pulling on his boots. "Take only what you can carry." They'd prepared for this possibility, keeping saddlebags packed by the door. But knowing it might come didn't make it easier when Mercy heard her father's voice raised in alarm next door at the parsonage. "Where are they?" The voice was cold, cultured. "Not from around here. The murderer and his whore?" "I don't know who you mean," Reverend Whitlow replied steadily. The sound of a fist meeting flesh made Mercy start forward, but Clay caught her arm. "We go out the back, now." They slipped through the rear door as boots thundered up their front steps. Clay had already saddled their horses, the bay mare and a young gelding he'd been breaking, and they mounted in desperate silence. "The church," Mercy whispered. "They're at the church, too." Armed men surrounded every building, their torches turning the night orange. This wasn't a posse. It was an army. Someone with deep pockets wanted them badly. Clay spotted a gap in the cordon near the livery. "There, ride hard and don't look back." They spurred their mounts, bursting through the line before the surprised gunmen could react. Shouts erupted behind them, then gunfire. Clay felt a bullet tug at his sleeve as they galloped into the darkness. They rode until the horses were lathered with sweat, following a dry riverbed that would hide their tracks. As dawn broke, Clay finally called a halt in a grove of cottonwoods. "Who were they?" Mercy asked, sliding from her saddle on trembling legs. "That wasn't Horace's men." "No." Clay's face was grim. "Someone with real money, real power." The answer came 3 days later when they stopped at a trading post for supplies. The wanted poster was fresh, the ink barely dry. "Wanted dead or alive. Clayton Travers and Mercy Travers. $5,000 reward, by order of Judge Marcus Garrett." "Garrett," Clay said softly. "Tom Garrett's brother. I should have known." The trader, a grizzled man named Elijah, studied them carefully. "You folks match the description pretty close. 'Cept the poster says the woman's got red hair, and yours is brown as mud." Mercy touched her hastily dyed hair boot polish and coffee grounds. "Must be different people." "Must be." Elijah slid supplies across the counter. "Funny thing about Tom Garrett. Used to come through here regular like. Always had young girls with him. Heading to his brother's ranch. None of 'em ever came back." Clay's jaw tightened. "And nobody said anything?" "Who'd listen? Marcus Garrett owns half the territory. Has judges, lawmakers, even a few U.S. marshals in his pocket." Elijah leaned forward. "But between you and me, if someone had put a bullet in Tom Garrett, they'd have done the world a favor. They left with more than supplies. They left with knowledge. Marcus Garrett wasn't just seeking vengeance. He was protecting an empire built on suffering, and he wouldn't stop until they were dead. The desert became their home." Clay taught Mercy everything he knew about survival, finding water by watching birds, reading weather in cloud formations, which cacti were safe to eat. She learned to move silently, to sleep light, to wake at the slightest sound. But the chase was relentless. Every town they approached had fresh posters. Every traveler they met might be a bounty hunter. They lived on rabbits and rattlesnake, slept under the stars, made love with desperate passion as if each time might be the last. "I'm sorry," Clay said one night as they huddled in a shallow cave, a sandstorm raging outside. "This isn't the life I wanted to give you." "Stop!" Mercy pressed her fingers to his lips. "I chose this. I chose you. No regrets. Remember?" But he could see the toll in her eyes, the constant fear, the exhaustion, the grief for the life they'd almost had. His beautiful, brave wife was becoming hollow-eyed and gaunt. The storm passed, leaving the world scoured clean. As they prepared to move on, Mercy suddenly doubled over, retching into the sand. "Mercy!" Clay was beside her instantly. "What's wrong? Bad water?" She wiped her mouth, a strange expression crossing her face. "Clay, when was the last time I had my monthly courses?" The realization hit them both like a physical blow. Mercy was with child. Everything changed in that moment. Running was no longer just about them. Clay looked at his wife, pale, thin, pregnant, and made a decision. "We're going to fight back. Clay, no more running. Our child deserves better than being born on the run." His eyes hardened. "It's time Marcus Garrett learned what happens when you corner a desperate man." They made their way to Mesilla, a town large enough to disappear in, but small enough to defend. Clay found work at a freight company while Mercy took in washing. They rented a small adobe house on the edge of town, keeping their heads down, building a life. But Clay wasn't idle. He sent letters to newspaper editors, territorial officials, anyone who might listen. He gathered evidence. Testimonies from girls who'd escaped the Garrett Ranch, documents proving corruption. "You're painting a target on our backs," Mercy warned as her belly began to round. "We already have one. Might as well make it count for something." The attack came on a moonless night. Mercy woke to Clay pressing a gun into her hand. "The cellar! Go! Not without you!" Glass shattered as bullets tore through their windows. Clay returned fire, his shots precise in the darkness. "Go! Think of the baby!" Mercy ran, her nightgown billowing, as their home became a battlefield. The cellar door was hidden beneath a rug, Clay's precaution paying off. She huddled in the darkness, gun trained on the entrance, feeling the baby move within her. The shooting stopped. Footsteps above. Then Clay's voice. "Mercy, it's safe." She emerged to find 3 dead gunmen and Clay bleeding from a graze on his shoulder. "Pack what you can. We leave in 5 minutes. Where will we go?" "The only place Marcus Garrett can't reach." Clay's smile was wolf sharp. "We're going to his ranch." The plan was insane, but that made it perfect. No one would expect them to ride straight into the enemy's stronghold. They traveled by night, resting in hidden arroyos during the day. Mercy's pregnancy made riding agony, but she never complained. The Garrett Ranch sprawled across a valley like a cancer, buildings and corrals extending for miles. Clay studied it through field glasses, noting guard positions, routines, weaknesses. "There," he pointed to a cluster of buildings on the eastern edge. "Servant quarters, less guarded." They waited for the new moon, then moved. Clay eliminated 2 sentries silently, skills learned in 6 years of running serving him now. They slipped through the compound like ghosts. The main house loomed before them, windows glowing with lamplight. Through the glass, they could see Marcus Garrett, older than his brother but with the same cruel mouth, dining alone. "Wait here," Clay whispered. "Like hell." Mercy checked her derringer. "We finish this together." They entered through the servant's door. The house was opulent, built on misery and blood. Clay felt his anger rise with each step. Marcus Garrett looked up as they entered his dining room, more annoyed than alarmed. "The help uses the back." His words died as he recognized them. "You. Me." Clay kept his gun steady. "Time to pay for your brother's sins. And your own. You killed my brother. Your brother was raping my mother. How many other women? Garrett, how many girls disappeared into this ranch? Marcus's face flushed. You can't prove anything. Actually, we can. Mercy stepped forward, her pregnancy visible beneath her coat. We have testimonies, documents, evidence of bribes, murders, trafficking, all sent to federal authorities beyond your reach. You're lying. Maybe, maybe not. Clay smiled coldly. But you'll never know, will you? Because either you call off the hunt, publicly exonerate us, or that evidence sees daylight. Your choice. You think you can threaten me? In my own home? Marcus reached for a hidden gun. Clay's shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him from his chair. The next one kills you. Decide. Marcus Garrett lay on his expensive carpet, blood seeping into the Persian weave, and saw his death in Clay's eyes. He was a man who understood power, and in that moment, all of it belonged to the desperate couple before him. What? What do you want? A signed confession, Mercy said calmly. Clearing our names, admitting your brother's crimes, and a bank draft for $10,000. Payment for the lives you've destroyed. 10,000? Clay's gun clicked. 15,000 now. Want to try for 20? It took an hour. Marcus Garrett, sweating and bleeding, wrote everything they demanded, signed it, sealed it, added the bank draft with shaking hands. If I see or hear of you again, Clay said as they prepared to leave. If any harm comes to my family, every newspaper in the territory gets copies of those documents. Understand? Marcus nodded. Defeated, they left as they'd come, ghosts in the night. By dawn, they were miles away, riding toward the sunrise and something that felt impossibly like hope. The money should have bought them peace. Instead, it painted a target on their backs that glowed brighter than any wanted poster. They'd made it to Colorado territory, settling in a mining town called Fortitude, where gold fever made everyone too busy to ask questions. Clay found work in the mines while Mercy established herself as a midwife, her gentle manner and growing belly earning trust from the miners' wives. They rented a small cabin on the hillside, with a view of snow-capped peaks that seemed to promise new beginnings. For 3 months, they lived quietly. Clay came home each evening covered in rock dust, and Mercy would wash his face with tender hands, feeling the baby kick between them. They even dared to furnish a nursery, hanging curtains Mercy had sewn from flour sacks. The peace shattered on a crisp October morning. Mercy was tending her small garden when she heard horses approaching, not the tired plod of miners' mules, but the purposeful gait of trained mounts. Mrs. Smith? The lead rider touched his hat brim. He wore a deputy star, but his eyes were cold as winter stone. Or should I say, Mrs. Travers. Mercy's hand went instinctively to her swollen belly. I don't know what you mean. My name is Mary Smith. Ma'am, we both know that ain't true. He produced a new wanted poster, their faces drawn with disturbing accuracy. Marcus Garrett's up the bounty. $20,000. That's enough to make even honest men think twice. Clay emerged from the cabin, rifle in hand. That's close enough. The deputy smiled. Mr. Travers, been looking for you. See, Mr. Garrett's changed his mind about your deal. Seems he'd rather see you dead than dignified. Then he's a fool, Clay said evenly. The documents are already public. The deputy's smile widened. Garrett's lost everything. His ranch, his reputation, his freedom. He's facing trial for his brother's crimes. But a dying man don't care about consequences. He just wants revenge. More riders appeared from the tree line. 8, 10, a dozen. Too many to fight, especially with Mercy in her condition. So what now? Clay asked, though he already knew. Now you come quiet, or we take you loud. Either way, that bounty's ours. Clay looked at Mercy, saw his own desperation mirrored in her eyes. Their child would be born in weeks. They'd come so far, survived so much, only to be betrayed by their own attempt at justice. I'll come, Clay said. But my wife stays. She's done nothing wrong. Can't do it. The deputy shook his head. Poster says both or nothing. That's when old Henrik stepped out of his neighboring cabin. The Swedish miner was built like a mountain, his white beard flowing over massive shoulders. "What's this, then?" "Nothing that concerns you, old man," the deputy warned. "Everything in Fortitude concerns me." Henrik was joined by others, miners coming off the night shift, their faces hard and their hands never far from the tools that served as weapons. "These are good people. They've helped birth our children, tended our sick. They're wanted criminals with a fortune on their heads." "So," Big Jim McCready stepped forward, his Irish accent thick with threat. "Way I see it, you're outnumbered and unwelcome. Best move along." The tension stretched taut. Miners continued to gather, forming a protective wall around the cabin. These were men who understood injustice, who'd been driven from their homes by poverty and persecution. They recognized their own story in the young couple's plight. The deputy's hand hovered near his gun. "You're interfering with the law." "Whose law?" Henrik spat. "The law of rich men who buy judges. We make our own law here." For a moment, violence teetered on the edge of eruption. Then the deputy backed down, smart enough to recognize a fight he couldn't win. "This isn't over. We'll be back with more men. Then we'll be waiting with more miners." Henrik replied. The posse retreated, but everyone knew it was temporary. Mercy sagged against Clay, the strain showing on her face. "We can't keep running. Not now." "You won't have to," Big Jim declared. "Community meeting, tonight." The meeting hall overflowed with the miners and their families. Clay and Mercy sat at the front, overwhelmed by this unexpected support. Henrik stood to speak. "These people came here seeking same as us, freedom, fresh start. Now they're hunted for defending themselves against evil men." He looked around the room. "Question is, are we community or just collection of strangers? They brought trouble to our door." Someone called out, "No." "Mrs." O'Brien stood, flour still dusting her apron from the day's baking. "They brought skills. Mrs. Travers delivered my grandson when Doc Stevens was too drunk to stand. Didn't charge nothing neither. Clay warned us about the weak timber in Shaft 3. Another miner added. "Saved 6 lives when it collapsed a week later." Stories poured forth, small kindnesses, shared struggles, the web of community that had formed without anyone noticing. When the vote came, it was unanimous. Clay and Mercy Travers were under the protection of Fortitude, but protection meant different things to different people. Some advocated fortress defense, others guerrilla tactics. Clay listened to the debates with growing unease. "No," he finally said. "I won't have blood spilled for us." "Then what?" Henrik demanded. "You'll surrender. Let them hang you? There's another way." Mercy spoke up, her voice calm despite exhaustion. "We use the law, the real law." She explained her plan. The new territorial governor was known to be honest, immune to bribes. If they could reach him, present their case directly, he might intervene. But it meant a dangerous journey to Denver, through passes already filling with snow. "That's 3 days hard riding," someone protested. "In her condition, 4 days by wagon," Clay corrected. "Which is what we'll use." "We'll use," Henrik emphasized. "You think you're going alone?" And so a convoy formed. 20 miners, their weapons cleaned and ready, surrounding a covered wagon where Mercy lay on feather beds donated by their wives. They left at dawn, breath frosting in the cold air, wheels creaking over frozen ground. The ambush came at Skeleton Pass. Gunfire erupted from the ridges above, bullets spanging off rocks and wagon wheels. The miners responded with devastating accuracy. Men who could judge distances in dark tunnels had no trouble picking off attackers in daylight. Clay fought from horseback, trying to draw fire away from Mercy's wagon. He saw Big Jim fall, clutching his shoulder, saw Henrik roar defiance as he charged uphill, his ancient shotgun booming. Then Mercy screamed, not from fear, but from pain. The baby was coming. "Get her to cover," Clay shouted. But there was no cover, only the killing ground of the pass. That's when they heard the bugle. Cavalry crested the ridge behind the bushwhackers, a full company in Union blue. The ambushers, caught between miners below and soldiers above, scattered like quail. The captain who rode down was young but competent. Heard there was trouble brewing. Governor's orders to escort the Travers family safely to Denver. How did you... Your wife's letter reached him. Mr. Travers, along with some very interesting documents about the Garrett family operations. The captain smiled. The governor takes a dim view of slavery, even the unofficial kind. They made camp that night in a protected valley, by firelight, with soldiers standing guard and miners boiling water. Mercy gave birth. The child came as the first stars appeared, a daughter, small but fierce, her first cry echoing off the canyon walls. "Hope," Mercy whispered, cradling the infant. "We'll call her Hope." Clay knelt beside them, tears streaming down his face. His family was safe. They were protected. The running could finally end. But Marcus Garrett had one card left to play. The assassination attempt came in Denver, at the governor's mansion itself. A servant paid to poison their food, a desperate last gambit from a desperate man. Only Mercy's caution, she'd learned to test everything during their month's running, saved them. The governor himself visited their hotel room afterwards. Mr. Garrett died last night. Prison food didn't agree with him. His expression suggested the disagreement might have been helped along. His organization is disbanded, his allies arrested or fled. You're free. Free. That word again, now heavy with meaning. "What will you do now?" the governor asked. Clay looked at Mercy nursing their daughter, at the miners who'd become family, at the future spreading before them like an unwritten map. "Build something," he said. "Something worth protecting." They returned to fortitude as heroes. The town had prepared a celebration. But what touched them most was the simple gift from Henrik, a deed to a small ranch outside town, purchased with community funds. "Every family needs a home," the old Swede said gruffly, "even one as trouble-prone as yours." That night, in their own home for the first time, Clay and Mercy stood over Hope's cradle. The baby slept peacefully, unaware of the journey that had brought her here. "No regrets?" Clay asked, as he had so many times before. Mercy leaned into his embrace. "How could I regret the path that led us here? To her, to this." Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing the world in pristine white. Inside, a fire crackled in the hearth, and Clay Travers held his family close, finally understanding what it meant to be truly free. The peace lasted 18 months. Long enough for Hope to take her first steps across the cabin floor, for Clay to build up the ranch with a small herd of cattle, for Mercy to believe they'd finally escaped their past. She should have known better. The past had a way of finding you, especially in the wide-open spaces of the West. The stranger arrived on a dust devil afternoon in July. Mercy was hanging laundry when she saw him approaching, a lone rider on a paint horse, moving with the easy confidence of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. Something about his posture, the set of his shoulders, sent ice through her veins. "Clay," she called softly, not taking her eyes off the rider. Her husband emerged from the barn, took one look, and moved his hand to his gun. "Get Hope inside." "No." Mercy stood her ground. "We face this together." The rider stopped at their gate, pushing back his hat to reveal a face that made Clay stiffen. The resemblance was unmistakable. The same storm-gray eyes, the same strong jaw, though this man's hair was pure silver. "Hello, little brother," Samuel Travers said. Clay hadn't moved. "Sam, thought you were dead." "Thought the same about you, until I saw a newspaper article about the heroic Clay Travers and his beautiful wife." Samuel's gaze shifted to Mercy, and she saw calculation in those familiar eyes. "Mrs. Travers, I've heard so much about you." "You haven't heard anything," Clay said flatly. "You weren't there. You left." "I was 17. Clay, what was I supposed to do against a whole town?" Bitterness crept into Samuel's voice. "I tried to find you and Ma. By the time I tracked you down, she was dead and you were gone. Why are you here now?" Samuel dismounted, moving with a slight limp. "Because I need my brother's help, and because it's time you knew the truth about that night Pa died." Against her better judgment, Mercy heard herself saying, "You'd better come inside." They sat at the kitchen table like a normal family. though Mercy kept Hope on her lap, and Clay never relaxed his vigilance. Samuel looked around the modest but clean home with something like envy. "You've done well for yourself," he said. "Better than me." Cut the reunion talk. Clay said, "What truth? What help?" Samuel pulled out a worn leather journal. This was Pa's. "I've carried it for 15 years, trying to make sense of it." He opened it to reveal pages of careful notes, dates, and names. Pa wasn't just some ranch hand who got lynched for stealing cattle. He was investigating something big. Clay took the journal with reluctant hands. As he read, his expression darkened. "This is about missing women. Girls disappearing from towns all over the territory. 23 that Pa documented," Samuel confirmed. "All young, all poor, all vanished without a trace. Pa thought he'd found the connection, a network of powerful men trafficking women to Mexico and further south. The Garrett brothers." Mercy breathed. Samuel nodded. "Among others, Pa was getting close to proof when they framed him for cattle theft. That lynch mob wasn't random justice. It was a silencing." "And you want what exactly?" Clay's voice was dangerous. "Revenge. Justice. We've had enough of both. I want to finish what Pa started." Samuel leaned forward. "There are more girls missing. The network didn't die with the Garretts. It just found new leadership. I've been tracking them for 3 years. But I need help. I need someone I can trust." "No." Clay stood abruptly. "I have a family now. A life. I won't risk it for ghosts." "What about for her?" Samuel produced a photograph. A young Mexican girl, perhaps 16, with frightened eyes. Maria Delgado, taken from El Paso 2 weeks ago. Her family scraped together everything they had to hire me to find her. His voice softened. "She has a little sister, Clay, just about your daughter's age." Mercy felt Clay waver and understood. He'd been that desperate family once, searching for justice that never came. She bounced Hope on her knee, thinking of all the mothers who'd never hold their daughters again. "Where would we even start?" she asked, ignoring Clay's sharp look. "Mercy, no, I'm not saying yes," she interrupted. "I'm gathering information. Where would we start?" "Mr. Travers?" Samuel smiled, and she saw Clay in that expression. "There's a revival meeting tomorrow night in Cedar Ridge. Traveling preacher named Josiah Whitman. Word is, he's more interested in recruiting fallen women for salvation than saving souls. Girls go to his meetings and don't come back." "Whitman," Clay repeated. "I know that name. From Pa's journal. He's been at this for 20 years, hiding behind a collar and a Bible." Samuel's eyes hardened. "But he made a mistake taking Maria. Her father is connected. He got word to the right people. And those people found me. And you found us." Clay's laugh was bitter. "Congratulations. Now leave." "Clay!" Mercy set Hope down to toddle toward her blocks. "What if it were Hope? Wouldn't you want someone to help?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Clay watched his daughter play, her innocent laughter a stark contrast to the darkness they were discussing. "Finally," he sighed, "one meeting. We go to this revival, see what we can learn. That's all." Samuel's relief was palpable. "That's all I'm asking." But Mercy knew better. Once you started down a path like this, there was no telling where it would lead. The revival was held in a huge tent on the outskirts of Cedar Ridge. Hundreds of people packed inside, seeking salvation or entertainment or just escape from their hard lives. Mercy had dressed carefully, modest but attractive, the kind of woman a predator might notice. "I don't like this," Clay muttered. Scanning the crowd, they'd left Hope with Mrs. O'Brien, but her absence felt like a missing limb. "There." Samuel nodded toward the platform where a man in black was preparing to speak. Josiah Whitman looked like everyone's kindly grandfather, white-haired, rosy-cheeked, with twinkling blue eyes. It made Mercy's skin crawl. "Brothers and sisters," Whitman's voice boomed across the tent, "I come to you with a message of redemption. No soul is too lost, no sinner too far gone." For an hour, he preached fire and brimstone mixed with honey-sweet promises. Mercy noticed how his attention lingered on certain women in the crowd. The young ones, the desperate ones, the ones who came alone. "There's a special prayer meeting after," he announced as things wound down. "For those seeking a more personal salvation. Ladies especially are welcome. The Lord has a particular love for his lost daughters." About a dozen women moved toward a smaller tent behind the main one. Mercy started to follow, but Clay caught her arm. "No, we've seen enough. We've seen nothing. Those women." Her protest was cut short by a scream from outside. They rushed out to find chaos, horses rearing, people scattering. In the confusion, Mercy saw him, a young Mexican man fighting desperately to reach the smaller tent. "Maria!" he screamed. "Maria!" Whitman's men were trying to subdue him, but he fought like a wildcat. Without thinking, Clay waded in, his fists finding targets with practiced ease. Samuel was right behind him, that limp not slowing him down in a fight. Mercy ran for the tent, ducking inside to find absolute horror. The prayer meeting was a selection process. Women stood in a line while two hard-faced men evaluated them like cattle. At the end of the line, she saw her, Maria Delgado, tears streaming down her face. "Everyone out!" Mercy shouted. "This man is a fraud! Run!" Some women fled immediately. Others seemed too broken or drugged to move. The evaluators turned on Mercy, and she saw murder in their eyes. That's when the tent wall exploded inward. Clay burst through the canvas like an avenging angel, Samuel at his heels. What followed was brutal and efficient. The traffickers were vicious, but the Travers brothers fought with the fury of men who'd seen too much evil. "Get them out!" Clay shouted to Mercy between blows. "All of them." She grabbed Maria, then helped the other women stumble toward safety. Behind her, she heard Whitman's voice rising in panic, calling for more men. They made it to the horses just as Whitman's reinforcements arrived. "Ride!" Samuel shouted, throwing Maria up behind her brother. Meeting point at dawn. The night erupted in gunfire. Mercy clung to Clay as their horse thundered into the darkness. Samuel riding alongside, behind them. The revival descended into chaos. Whitman's careful operation exposed and shattered. They regrouped at an abandoned mine shaft as the sun rose. Maria was reunited with her brother, sobbing in his arms. 3 other women had escaped with them, each with their own story of deception and near tragedy. "It's not over," Samuel said quietly. "Whitman will disappear, pop up somewhere else with a new name, unless we end it." Clay finished, permanently. "Clay, no." Mercy touched his face. "We saved Maria. We saved these women. That's enough." "Is it?" He gestured to the journal Samuel had brought. 23 names. Mercy. And those are just the ones Pa found. How many more? How many will there be if we walk away now? She saw the struggle in his eyes. The man who wanted peace, warring with the boy who'd lost everything to evil men's greed. And she made a choice that would have horrified the preacher's daughter she'd once been. "Then we end it," she said simply. "But we do it smart, legal, no more running from the law." Samuel smiled grimly. "I've got contacts, federal marshals who've been building cases against the trafficking rings, with testimony from Maria and the others. With Pa's journal, with what we witnessed tonight. We can destroy them." Clay finished. "Not just Whitman, the whole network. It would mean danger. It would mean putting their peaceful life at risk. But looking at Maria clinging to her brother, thinking of Hope sleeping safely in her bed, Mercy knew they had no choice. "Partners." Samuel extended his hand to Clay. Clay looked at Mercy, seeking permission or absolution. She nodded, and he clasped his brother's hand. "Partners." The sun rose fully, painting the desert gold. Somewhere, a mockingbird began to sing, and 3 people who'd learned the hard way that you can't outrun evil prepared to face it head-on, armed with something more powerful than guns or gold, the unbreakable bonds of family, both born and chosen. The trial of Josiah Whitman became the most sensational event the territory had seen in years. Federal marshals had arrested him and 14 associates based on the testimony Clay, Mercy, and Samuel had helped gather. The courtroom in Denver overflowed with journalists, curious citizens, and families of the missing women. Mercy sat in the witness box, hope on her lap despite the judge's initial protests. She'd insisted, let these men see what they'd tried to destroy, the innocents they'd sought to corrupt. Mrs. Travers, the prosecutor began gently. Tell us what you witnessed at the revival meeting. She spoke clearly, without embellishment, describing the selection process, the drugged women, the terror in Maria's eyes. When the defense attorney tried to discredit her as a woman of questionable morals, hadn't she run away with an outlaw? Mercy's response was fierce. I chose love over convention. Sir, these men chose profit over humanity. I'll let the good people of this court decide which is the greater sin. Clay testified next, his presence commanding the room. He spoke of his father's investigation, of the pattern of disappearances, of powerful men who thought themselves above justice. When asked why he'd risked his new life to pursue this, his answer was simple. Because I have a daughter. Because every one of those missing girls was someone's daughter. Samuel's testimony was perhaps the most damaging. He'd spent 3 years infiltrating the edges of the trafficking network, documenting routes, bribes, and victims. His evidence was meticulous, undeniable, but it was Maria Delgado who truly sealed Whitman's fate. Speaking through an interpreter, she described her abduction, the promises of honest work that turned to imprisonment, the horror that awaited her had she not been rescued. Her quiet dignity in the face of such evil moved even hardened court reporters to tears. The verdict came swift, guilty on all counts. Whitman would hang, his associates facing long prison sentences. As they led him away, he turned to stare at Clay with naked hatred. This isn't over, he hissed. I have friends, powerful friends. Clay met his gaze steadily. Let them come. Outside the courthouse, in the crisp autumn air, the 3 unlikely partners stood together. Samuel had been offered a position with the federal marshals, hunting the remnants of the trafficking rings. The Travers Ranch had become a beacon of hope, with several rescued women staying there while rebuilding their lives. What now? Samuel asked, watching Hope chase pigeons across the courthouse square. Now we go home, Mercy said firmly. We've done our part. But she could see in both brothers' eyes that it wasn't that simple. They'd tasted purpose beyond mere survival, and it had changed them. The attack came 3 weeks later, on a night when storm clouds masked the moon. Mercy woke to the sound of breaking glass, immediately reaching for the rifle they kept beside the bed. Clay was already up, peering through the window. How many? She whispered. 6, maybe 7, coming from multiple directions. They'd prepared for this possibility. Mercy grabbed Hope, still drowsy with sleep, and headed for the fortified cellar. But armed men were already in the house, cutting off their escape. Well, a cultured voice emerged from the shadows. The famous Travers family. The speaker stepped into view, a man in an expensive suit, clearly uncomfortable in the frontier setting. Behind him stood hired guns with dead eyes and ready weapons. Senator Blackwood, Clay said, recognizing him from newspaper photographs. Whitman's biggest supporter. Former supporter, Blackwood corrected. The fool's testimony implicated half of Washington. Do you have any idea how much damage you've caused? Not enough, Mercy said, shielding Hope with her body. Not nearly enough. Blackwood's face contorted. Kill them all. Make it look like raiders. That's when the windows exploded inward. Samuel and a squad of federal marshals burst through, weapons blazing. The senator's men, caught off guard, scrambled for cover. Drop your weapons, Marshal Davidson commanded. Senator Blackwood, you're under arrest. The gunfight was brief but vicious. Clay covered Mercy and Hope as bullets shattered their carefully built home. When the smoke cleared, 3 of Blackwood's men were dead, the rest in custody. The senator himself cowered behind overturned furniture, his expensive suit torn and dusty. You can't arrest me, he blustered. I have congressional immunity. Not for attempted murder, Davidson said, slapping on handcuffs. And not for what we found in your private papers. Seems you kept very detailed records of your investments in human trafficking. As they led Blackwood away, Samuel approached his brother. I'm sorry. We thought we had all of them. This connection to Washington, it's bigger than we imagined. Clay looked at his shattered home, at his terrified daughter clinging to Mercy. It's always bigger, always deeper. When does it end? When men like us make it end. Samuel said simply. In the weeks that followed, Blackwood's arrest sent shockwaves through the capital. More arrests followed as his records revealed a web of corruption reaching the highest levels of government. The Travers name became synonymous with courage in the face of evil. But fame was a double-edged sword. Journalists camped outside their ranch. Dime novelists spun increasingly wild tales of their adventures. Parents named their children Clay and Mercy. It was everything they'd tried to avoid. We could leave, Clay suggested one evening as they worked to repair their bullet-riddled home. Start over somewhere new, again. Mercy paused in her sweeping, considering. Through the window, she could see the graves they'd added to their property, women who'd died before they could be saved, finally given proper burials. She thought of Whitman's other victims, still missing, of other predators still hunting. No, she said finally. We've run enough. This is our home. This is our fight. Clay studied her face, seeing not the sheltered preacher's daughter he'd met in a dusty church, but a warrior tempered by trial. It'll never really be over. There will always be another Whitman, another Blackwood. Then there will always need to be people like us. She resumed sweeping, each stroke purposeful. Besides, someone needs to teach Hope that standing up to evil is worth any cost. As if summoned, their daughter toddled in, clutching a rag doll Mercy had made from scraps. Mama, why are there holes in the walls? Mercy knelt, gathering Hope close. Because some bad men tried to hurt us, but good people stopped them. Like Papa and Uncle Sam? Yes, sweetheart. Like Papa and Uncle Sam. Clay joined them on the floor, wrapping his arms around his family. Outside, Samuel was teaching the rescued women to shoot, their laughter mixing with the sound of gunfire. It wasn't the peaceful life they'd once dreamed of, but it was a life with purpose. No regrets? Clay asked, as he always did. Mercy kissed him, tasting gunpowder and hope. Never, although, she smiled. I do miss that little church where we met, before it all got so complicated. It was always complicated. Clay reminded her. We just didn't know it yet. That night, as Hope slept between them in their repaired bed, Mercy dreamed not of violence or pursuit, but of that first kiss in the dusty church. The kiss that had broken every rule, defied every convention, and somehow led them here to a life neither could have imagined. In the morning, there would be more work, more women to help heal, more battles to plan with Samuel and the marshals, more threats to face down. But tonight, they were simply Clay and Mercy Travers, two souls who'd found each other in the wilderness and refused to let go, no matter what storms came. The desert wind sang through the bullet holes they hadn't quite patched, carrying the scent of sage and possibility. Somewhere out there, evil men plotted in shadows. But here, in this small ranch house, love had built a fortress that no amount of darkness could breach. Hope stirred in her sleep, murmuring something about horses. Mercy smoothed her daughter's hair, remembering her own mother's gentle hands. The cycle of love and protection continued, passed down like a sacred trust. Thank you, she whispered to the God she'd never stopped believing in, despite everything, for sending me a drifter who answered my prayer with a kiss, for giving me the strength to break every law except love's, for this wild, dangerous, beautiful life. Clay's hand found hers in the darkness, fingers intertwining. No words were needed. They'd said everything that mattered in bullets and blood, in tender moments between storms, in the simple act of choosing each other again and again. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, the Travers family slept peacefully in their battle-scarred home. Proof that sometimes the greatest act of rebellion is simply refusing to let love die in a hard world. And in the end, that was the most powerful law of all. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West Campfire. I'd love to know where in the world you're enjoying this story. Drop a comment and let's connect across the miles. If you've ridden with Clay and Mercy through their trials, please consider subscribing to the Wild West Campfire channel. Share your thoughts about their journey in the comments below. Did their love story touch your heart? What would you have done in their boots? Until next time, partners, keep that campfire burning and those stories flowing.